everyone, and welcome into Pushing the Limits. Today, I have a wonderful gentleman for you. I have Dr. John Lewis with me. Welcome to the show, Dr. John. Fabulous to have you.
Thank you, Lisa. I really appreciate you finding me, and I look forward to our conversation today.
Yeah, look, I listened to you. The first time I came across your work was Dr. William Clearfield, Dr. Bill, who I had on the show actually last week. Wonderful, wonderful guy. And
Wonderful. I love
yeah.
Bill.
Yeah, same. I love him, and I'm going to have him on again because you can't fit everything in one interview with such a knowledgeable man. But I came across your lecture, which was on polysaccharides, and we're going to dive into that today. But before we get into the meat and bones of the conversation, Dr. John, can you give us a little bit of a background as to how you got to be a polysaccharide scientist, and where did that come from?
Great question. Well, I'm a physiologist by training, and I spent about 20 years of my life at the University of Miami Medical School conducting clinical trials in nutrition, dietary supplementation, and exercise training. And about 20 years ago, I met a gentleman by the name of Dr. Reg McDaniel, who is a pathologist by training. Actually, yesterday was his birthday. I believe Reg turned 88.
Wow.
And just talk about Dr. Clearfield being a great man. Dr. McDaniel is in that same mold. I mean, just an amazing human being, the mind of any group of encyclopedias you want to put together, that's Reg's mind. But he talked to me about, and we met through a mutual friend from the university, and he gave me a very fast education in these polysaccharides, and I knew nothing about what he was talking about. I literally had no clue. Obviously, most people, when you hear the word aloe vera, you think of something for a sunburn or a cut or a wound, something topical. And that was basically about all I knew about aloe vera at that time.
Mm-hmm.
But when he started describing to me all of the work that he and his colleagues, so at that point, he was about 20 years into it.
Mm-hmm.
He
Wow.
actually went from running a pathology unit at a hospital in Dallas, Texas, to practicing nutrition. That's how this story changed his life.
Wow.
And then similarly, he changed my life in the sense of I was already very interested in nutrition, applying nutrition, supplementation, and all these things, exercise to my own life, for my own health and wellness. And I was already researching these topics. But I had no clue the power of these polysaccharides. And so just to make a very long story short, Dr. Reg and I ended up becoming very close friends. And all of the work that he and his colleagues up to that point had put into looking at why and how these polysaccharides are so effective for human health was very inspirational for me. And fortunately, through the generosity of a family who had listened to Dr. Reg give a lecture talking about some of the people that he had worked with individually, not in a clinical trial, but with dementia and Parkinson's. And this family had lost 4 of their family members to Alzheimer's disease. Wow. And so she and her husband, this lady and her husband, agreed, or they decided, based on how inspired they were by what Dr. Reg had done at that time, to basically provide a gift through their own generosity for research. And so Dr. Reg was not affiliated with any university or any academic institution, and he approached me and said, "Hey, John, we have this family that wants to make a donation. They would love for us to do some research, and it has to be an Alzheimer's disease." Now, I had not, at that point in my life, had any real experience with Alzheimer's. I had my grandparents and other family members die of basically everything else, different types of heart disease, cancer, the typical things, but nothing in the world of dementia or neurodegeneration. So I really didn't, on a personal level, I didn't really have any connection to it, but I definitely knew the seriousness of it back. We're talking again, this is about 18 years ago when he and I met. And then shortly thereafter was when we got the money for the study. But we were able to conduct this trial, and I'll talk about that more in a moment. But this is really how this all began. It was just through, meeting this gentleman who completely changed my life. I mean, when I was a student and learning about biochemistry, and what I learned about saccharides at that time was basically that all saccharides were a source of fuel for the cells. That was really the extent of my knowledge about saccharides, and certainly the ones from aloe vera in particular are so special. And even rice bran, that's another one where we focused a lot of our research when I was still full-time in academics. But if I can, I'll just share one other little point about this that I think is very important for our listeners, and that is, and again, I'm speaking from the American experience, so maybe it's not exactly the same in New Zealand, but in America, you know, the media has led all of us to believe over the last probably half century that when you hear the word sugar, you immediately think what?
Bad.
Bad, right?
Yeah.
It's bad for you. Like there's no, you may love sweets and you may love the taste of sugar, but you know in the back of your mind somewhere, oh no, this is bad for me. But that's a very ignorant use of a word that's very generic.
Mm.
And I would just ask people to be mindful of the fact that a sugar is not a sugar. So I could have said, you asked me to talk about polysaccharides. And
Yeah.
I love that word because it's very specific.
Yeah.
But the synonym to polysaccharide is complex sugar.
Complex sugar.
Polysaccharides
Yeah.
are sugars. So I want all of our listeners to be very mindful of the fact that a sugar is not a sugar. A sugar depends on two very important characteristics. One, its source, and two, its biochemical structure. So, for example, a monosaccharide like high fructose corn syrup, I think we can all agree that that will spike your
That's bad.
glucose.
Yeah.
You know, it will cause you to have a very big insulin response. If you keep eating high fructose corn syrup day after day for weeks, months, and years, you're going to eventually suffer some very serious metabolic consequences from that. Diabetes, heart disease, all the above, cancer,
Yep.
you name it. But high fructose corn syrup as a monosaccharide, then you have a disaccharide like sucrose, which is a little more complex. Excuse me. And then you have these polysaccharides from things like aloe vera and rice bran, and of course, lots of vegetables, seaweed, mushroom, a lot of different plants in nature have these polysaccharides. But the ones that we've studied, Dr. McDaniel and our other colleagues, the ones from aloe vera and rice bran, Lisa, are just so incredibly dynamic. And I would put them up against any other material, any other nutrient, phytonutrient that Mother Nature provides for humanity for health and well-being. And so there is something very special about these polysaccharides in the sense of their complexity. They are literally hundreds of glucose units attached together by these glycosidic bonds that are so complex in design that you can't even draw them. They're just way too,
Wow.
they're almost,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. They're almost like five-dimensional. They're
Mm.
so complex, they cannot even be completely drawn in one picture, if you will.
Mm.
So with all of that complexity, and this is way beyond like an amino acid or a fatty acid. I mean, we all, you know, I'm sure you're probably dealing with the same group of people I am here in the US, this carnivore movement recently, you know, people are just on this big protein kick, and they probably have been since the Atkins movement 40 years ago. But you know, people, you're constantly hearing people pounding the protein drum, and of course we need protein. I'm not saying we don't, but the amount of information that our genes interpret from our environment, which namely is our food, when we put that into our system, our genes interpret that information, and then they guide our cells in how to function properly.
Mm-hmm.
So these polysaccharides from aloe vera and rice bran are so dynamic and so beneficial to literally every cell in our body. It's not just in our brain or our heart or our liver or our skin or whatever. It's literally every cell in our body. And I think there's actually something beyond just the biochemistry component to these structures. I think there's something on the physics level. We can talk about that at another
Yeah.
time, but it's my own theory. I don't have any data to prove that. But I do think there's something about the resonant frequency of these polysaccharides from aloe vera and rice bran that is the reason why, in addition to their complexity and how much information they contain, the reason why they're so beneficial for humanity. But that's just a little bit of a background spiel on, you know, what these are and why they're so dynamic. And we can talk about the research results, which, you know, validate some of the points that I'm making here. But I mean, I take this stuff every day. I've been on it for 10 years. My mother's been on it for 15.
Wow.
My wife started taking it when she was pregnant with our daughter. Our daughter turned 4 when back in March, a couple of months ago. And so, you know, I make that point to say that prevention to me is just as important
Oh
as
gosh,
treatment.
yes.
Or, you know, I mean, who wants to end up with any type of chronic disease? And I put these polysaccharides right at the top of my list. I mean, oxygen obviously is our first nutrient. And then after that, we need vitamins and minerals and amino acids and fatty acids and some other things. But these polysaccharides from aloe vera and rice bran for me are just as important as anything else. And so that's why I'm on them every day and have been for many years. And, starting our daughter when she was 6 months old, we started introducing solid food in her diet. I started giving her the polysaccharides. And this kid, like I said, just turned 4, and she's healthy as a horse, and her brain functions like you can't believe. And she started actually speaking in complete sentences before she even turned 2 years of age.
Wow.
And her comprehension ability is just incredible. So, people ask me all the time, oh, well, are they okay for children, or can a pregnant woman take them, or these kinds of questions? It's just, for me, it's almost aggravating when people ask me that kind of question, because I'm like, hello, if you're living and breathing and you can swallow, yes, you can take them.
Well, that's unusual, because on most supplements you do get the warning, just out of safety, don't give it to pregnant women, don't give it to babies, so that's probably why everybody asks, just in case, because these are concentrated.
Right.
Yeah, and I've been diving into not the aloe and the rice bran, but to things like trehalose and allulose and mannose, and coming to realize that, and I have those in our diets, and we use things like trehalose, all the time as a sweetener for things, but it also is very beneficial for the gut and does a whole lot of other things. And so there's nuance to the sugar conversation that just gets overlooked in the general thing, in the general media. And we both agree that high corn, fructose corn syrup is definitely not what you want to be having, and that will lead to an early grave and some very horrible way to go out, really, if you and that's in everything, but be able to separate this polysaccharides out from that. And you started off in academia. You've done a heck of a lot of research on the polysaccharides, and now you've stepped out of academia, and we'll get into what you're doing and why in a little bit. But can you sort of walk us through some of the studies that you've done? Now, this is like specifically, you've looked at brain, because you had the funding from this generous family, and they looked at Alzheimer's first. Can you walk us through that Alzheimer's study and what you found there?
Absolutely. And I think as I'm getting into our research, let me just make sure that all of our listeners are clear that I'm not talking about utilizing nutrition to treat disease. I know that's a very touchy subject, and something, in terms of regulatory issues in our country, we do.
Gotta say it.
I imagine you do that as well in New Zealand, but I just want everybody to make sure that no one thinks Lewis is saying we're using nutrition to treat disease. What we're doing is using the power of nutrition to provide the raw materials that the cells need to function properly, guided by our genes. And that's a far different paradigm and approach to taking a drug and treating a symptom of disease. So everyone, please be very clear. I'm not saying that we're using nutrition to treat disease here. So with that said, we put people with moderate to severe Alzheimer's disease on our dietary supplement formulation that included the aloe and rice bran polysaccharides, among a couple of other things. And we followed them for 12 months. We didn't change their diet, their medicine. We didn't exercise them, put them on any other treatment or therapy. We literally just gave them the dietary supplement, and we told them to basically maintain their lifestyle the same way they always do. And of course, this was in most cases the caregiver, not the person, him or herself.
Yeah.
And of course, if you have an emergency, obviously you have to take care of that situation, but otherwise just, keep doing what you're doing. Don't change anything else. And so with the amount of funding we had, we were able to do the neuropsych, or the cognitive testing, at baseline, 3, 6, 9, and 12 months. And then we drew blood at baseline in 12 months. Mm-hmm. So we were, based on Dr. Reg's, previous work with individuals, we were very optimistic. We were very hopeful that our study would show something. But quite frankly, since it was the first clinical trial, we didn't really have any idea what, ultimately at the end of the day we would show, especially for a 12-month intervention. I mean, if for any of you who are listening and you know something about clinical research, you know that dealing with human beings is very challenging. I mean, it's not like studying cells or tissues or rats. Those are very, very easy subjects to manipulate and control their environment. Humans are,
don't follow the rules, do they?
Exactly. And so, they may show up late to an appointment, or they may not show up at all, or, drop out, or, a whole host.
Especially people dealing with Alzheimer's, right?
That's exactly right. However, on the other hand, compared to some of the other studies that I conducted, I can tell you that, and you know this in taking care of your mother, that the people who are caregivers of someone with an Alzheimer's condition, be it a parent or a spouse or whatever, they literally are the most motivated group
Yeah.
of care you will meet in the world, because they know from a medical perspective, there's nothing that can be done for their loved one. So they are literally so willing to try anything out of just nothing more than sheer desperation
Can relate
to
to
try
that.
something will help. So as we're conducting the study, and oh, by the way, I didn't mention that the psychiatrist and some of the other staff members, they were very skeptical. They were like, well, we think this is nonsense. This is nutrition. We're into drugs. We only study drugs here. We're all about drugs. And Dr. Reg and I, he came
No
into my
comment.
exactly, of course. He flew into town, to meet, to kick off the study, and he and I kind of looked at each other very, like with, wow, like, these people are really just brash about their skepticism. They're not even trying to hide it.
Yeah.
But we start the study and we start enrolling people, and again, these are moderate to severe severity patients. These are not like mild dementia or newly diagnosed. They had to have the disease at least for 1 year, and they were basically, the worst severe cases. And these are, again, people that Big Pharma cares nothing about these people. They look at them as lost causes, basically, from a research perspective. So
Absolutely.
we start running the study and we start, conducting everything. And meanwhile, I start, little by little, information starts trickling in anecdotally. I start getting phone calls from caregivers. Oh, Dr. Lewis, my loved one is now talking about things, doing things that he or she hasn't done in some cases in years. And, I'm getting these kinds of
Wow.
reports coming. The oldest lady in the study was 93, and she had had the disease for like 11 years, was sitting in a chair and could not speak. I mean, just basically like a piece of furniture on top of a piece of furniture, just didn't have any ability to do anything in life. We enrolled her in the study. It was not even the 3-month assessment. At some point between baseline and the 3rd month, she actually started walking again. She walked in the center one day and she called one of the clinical coordinators by his first name. That guy started crying like a baby. It was so emotionally moving and powerful for him to actually see this lady walk again and remember his name for the very first time. He started crying like a baby. And I always get chills every time I tell this story, just because of how emotionally powerful this work is. I mean, it's one thing to do great science and be a good ethical scientist, but when you can actually show benefit to people's lives, that's a whole different level of
Totally.
success and gratification. So as these things happen, and of course it took us a couple of years to run this study, we enrolled 34 people. And so over a 12-month intervention, it took time to do all this. So we finished the study and now we're analyzing the data. And so Dr. McDaniel and I were most excited about the cognitive functioning data that we had, and we started looking at that. And so we used, as part of our measure, the ADAS-Cog, which is widely considered to be the gold standard for assessing cognitive function.
Yep.
People with dementia. It's been published in thousands of papers at this point. It's been around for decades. And we showed clinically and statistically significant improvement in cognitive function at 9 and 12 months.
Wow. That's
Lisa,
amazing.
that's
No, yep,
that
it's unheard of.
And I want to make sure that our listeners are clear on the distinction between clinically and statistically significant. So you can have a study with large numbers of subjects, hundreds or thousands. It's easy to show statistical significance when you have huge numbers, just due to the law of numbers. That's what you'll get. Just randomly, you'll get statistical significance. But does it have any clinical or practical value to it? So that's the question. So with the ADAS-Cog, if you show a change in the score of 4 points or more in either direction, whether it's improvement or deterioration, that's considered clinically significant. And we showed that at 9 and 12 months.
Wow.
So again, don't take my word for it. Go to PubMed, do your own research, do your own literature search. But I always, anytime I have interviewed, I always challenge people, show me one other study that shows anything similar in people with moderate to severe Alzheimer's disease. And oh, by the way, they were on average 79.9 years of age.
Wow.
And they didn't just have Alzheimer's. They had diabetes, depression, different forms of heart disease, all other sorts of comorbid issues. So these were very old, very sick folks that we showed these changes. On the cellular level, we showed an improvement in the CD4 to CD8 ratio. That's our ratio of helper cells to cytotoxic cells. That's all of us, not just for people with Alzheimer's. We showed reductions in TNF alpha and VEGF. These are two proteins that are commonly looked at in heart disease and cancer. Our paper was probably the first paper that showed that kind of improvement in people with Alzheimer's disease. And then we also showed in that first paper an increase of adult stem cell production according to CD14 cells, just under 300% improvement over that 12-month period.
Wow. Can we double down on that one? Because that's pretty amazing, right? We need stem cells are what help heal our body. And so to get the CD14 levels up is that's phenomenal. And the CD4 CD8 ratio, like these are markers, people, that we look at for how is your immune system doing as you get older and your helper cells versus your toxic cytotoxic cells. So to see movement in those two factors, and I think it was the VEGF and the TNF alpha too, which you also saw change in. So these are just massive, and that's usually looked at in cancer, not Alzheimer's. So yeah, really incredible results. And in clinical significance, like when you're getting these, like people often say, oh, well, anecdotal evidence doesn't count. In my world, like in my way of thinking, anecdotal evidence should be what is the instigator of research, for starters, because these are the outliers. Like with my mum's case, no doctor has ever come to me, or no scientist has ever come to me and said, why is she not dead? Or how is she, how did she come back? What did you do? No one's interested in the success stories, And if we look at something like radical remission, we're looking at cancer with Dr. Kelly Turner's work. I love that because she was looking at all the people who survived terminal diagnoses for cancer, right? And studied them. And that's what we should be doing. We should be looking at these anecdotal cases of where they've beaten the odds and they've done something. And so, yeah, I mean, I just think that the anecdotal side of thing has its relevance. It's not just, it's just a story. It's just one person.
That's right. And that's exactly what motivated this lady who donated the money for our study. She heard Dr. Reg talking about his anecdotal cases of people with dementia and Parkinson's. He was putting them on another polysaccharide formula similar to what we used in the study, but different. And so that inspired her to give the money that we used to run this clinical trial. But I just want to, one other final point I want to make about our first paper, that was back in 2013. It's hard to believe that's been 11 years ago, but compare our results. And again, the collective, the cognitive function plus all of the immune and inflammatory markers, there's nothing else out there. I mean, Lisa, look at the 5 FDA approved drugs for dementia, any kind of diet, any other dietary supplement, exercise, hyperbaric oxygen, acupuncture, music therapy, red light therapy. Whatever, like show me any other type of treatment or therapy or intervention that showed something similar or close to what we showed. And I'll be surprised actually, because it's been 11 years and I didn't see anything before and I haven't seen anything since that showed, what we showed. And that first paper we published, actually, we've published 4 papers now from that study. That was the first one. And the only time in my career I'm going on, I don't even know the exact number. I'm going on like 190 scientific articles I've published and now no longer being, it's not really probably even in my top 10 list of priorities, but I still enjoy the thrill of scientific publishing. But that first paper we published in the Journal of Alzheimer's Disease, and I actually got a call from the editor, which this never happens. I mean, unless you're some, really big name person, I'm a nobody. But I got a call from the editor when we submitted that paper, and he was like, Dr. Lewis, your paper's amazing. I'm going to publish this paper as soon as the reviews come back. I'm going to publish this immediately. This needs to be, to be published quickly to show people.
Get it out there.
That never happened. That was the only time in my career that ever happened to date. And so that paper was published very rapidly. But at that point, and this is a little bit of a tangent, but now that I'm thinking about it, I just want to share this with your listeners as well. You can imagine how excited I was. I mean, I felt like I was on some really big, significant discovery, and I thought I could really leverage this first study for the rest of my life, basically. Like I was going to utilize this as kind of my springboard to a big academic career. I really felt like this was something major. And so I started writing proposals for the NIH and the Alzheimer's Association. And over that 4-year period from 13 to the point of leaving academics in 17, I tried 4 times. And for those of you who don't know, grant writing is not an easy thing. You don't just do that in 5 minutes. It takes days, weeks, months, some cases even years just to write a proposal, let alone actually get a proposal funded. But I tried 4 times with NIH and Alzheimer's Association, twice with each, saying, here, look at our data, look at what we've shown, look at what the potential is, help us, help us, give us more money, help us extend this research. And I got that much.
Crickets. Yeah. Yeah. It doesn't surprise me, like I have no faith in those sorts of things to actually follow the real science and the real things. Like, it's the same with like the Veterans Association or the Cancer Society or that wouldn't be where I'd be putting my donations, put it that way. Like they're not up on the latest and they're not following, and there's ulterior motives, I think, as to why, and I don't know, but it doesn't seem like they go after the really good science, the scientists that are actually coming out with the great stuff. And this is what's so frustrating for people in academics when they're trying to get funding for the thing that they know is going to help so many lives, and yet we hear all the statistics of how many Alzheimer's cases are coming at us and what we should be doing, and they'll spend billions on the drug discovery, which is probably one of the biggest wastes of money that I've ever seen, is actually Alzheimer's drug research. Like they've come up with less than zero, just nothing, following this, tau and the tangles and the, and trying to fix it with a one magic bullet, and it doesn't work. I mean, I've had Dr. Dale Bredesen on the show, and he talks about the 36 holes in the roof sort of approach, and I think he's onto it. Like this is a multimodal approach that we need, and things like polysaccharides. I mean, how simple is it to actually do this? Like to try this, the supplement actually, and put that in, and it's not going to make anybody super rich anytime soon, and so you're just not going to get that research done, aren't you?
Well, needless to say, I went from cloud 9 or on top of the mountain. I was so excited and just so enthusiastic about what we'd shown, and then I didn't go in the valley. I was under the valley. I was so sad, mad, frustrated, aggravated at all these, bureaucrats that supposedly talk about their interest in nutrition, but at the end of the day, they have no interest in it. And I did a real self-assessment at that point in my life where I looked around at all of my colleagues, and they're all doing 2 things. They're either doing pharmacology or genetics. And if you're not in those 2 areas, at least in the United States, this is just my own experience, and especially pharmacology, genetics is, still a little bit not fringe, but just not as mainstream. But all these people doing pharmacology, and that's where the people at these big institutions want to focus, because they know that if they make some discovery, they can license it to a big biotech or biopharma company, and then they make millions or billions of dollars with it. And with nutrition, it just doesn't work.
No, you can't do that. And so many good things just don't ever see the light of day, do they, in the nutrition space? And these could be more powerful than the actual drugs. Like,
oh, absolutely, by far.
And they never see it.
Another thing I discovered along this journey is that FDA, when it comes to a drug, you were talking about how many billions of dollars have been squandered on this, this pursuit of treatment for neurodegeneration. FDA does not even require drug companies to collect cognitive function data when they're trying to make a claim for a drug about dementia. How asinine is that?
Didn't know that.
Yeah, I mean, how asinine is that? So, so many problems and issues with the so-called system. it makes me so angry. I can't think about it too much, or it's too distracting for me. I just have to keep focused on my work and what I'm doing. But I basically in 17, actually, I decided probably in 15 or 16, but it took me a while because I had so many studies that were underway and I had to wrap up things and, really kind of make sure every obligation was met. But I just decided after getting rejected by these bureaucrats that I was not going to waste the last 20 or 30 years of my life, how much ever time I had left, banging my head against the wall till I bleed, trying to get people to understand the value and importance of nutrition. I just thought being in business would be a much better path to choose, and that hasn't been a bowl of cherries either.
No.
But but, but at least it's a whole different environment where I'm my own boss and I'm not
Exactly.
beholden to some institution's policies and regulations. And, I'm not begging these. I mean, I look at, and again, I don't know how much experience you've had with maybe some of your other guests, but in my view of submitting a grant proposal to any place like NIH or Alzheimer's Association or American Cancer Society or American Heart Association, if you're not part of their clique, like if you don't have, connections to their directors or, whoever their overseers are of these applications, then you are just literally, you're gambling. It's like going to Las Vegas and, pulling the slot machine, because it's like submitting something to a black hole of no idea what or who is going to look at your document and evaluate it with any sense of clarity or honesty or objectivity. And it's literally like gambling. I mean, to me, there's nothing, it's a waste of time. And I can tell you in my career, I maybe had 10% of my applications funded. I can't tell you how much time I wasted, not just in polysaccharide research, but in other areas that I was working. So much time I wasted spending writing all these damn proposals that, sorry for my language, that
No.
went nowhere and just basically were a waste of time.
Yep. No, I totally hear you. And I hear that frustration from other scientists too that I've interviewed, and many that have gone exactly as you have and gone, well, I'm going to have to take, control of this myself and step outside this and do something because I want to help the people on the street, and you got some who've managed to get a whole lot of their own studies. I had Dr. Barry Tan on, who's the world's leading vitamin E researcher, and he's done his own clinical research. He's funded it through his little company and he's built it, and he's getting the word out there. And it's a long road and it's a hard road, but amazing. Like he's got something like 25 clinical studies behind him now over the last 20, 30 years, like that, and all done by himself, or most of it done with his own little company. And that's massive. That's like, people don't quite understand what that means, like to do clinical research. And I have a startup biotech company, Avum Labs, and we launch our first product in next month. And, we want to do clinical research, but we've got to get out of the gates first, before we got to get some runs on the board and some, movement happening. And then we can look at those sorts of things. And even though we have clinical research in the ingredients that we're using, it's a long, hard road, right? It's not just that you throw a bunch of stuff together and then off you go. And unfortunately, many supplement companies do that. They just throw a bunch of stuff together and it looks flash on the outside. It doesn't have any clinical relevance, or the ingredient lists are just long but not much in it. And so there's difficulties on both sides. But you've decided to step outside and actually take your own destiny into your own hands, and actually help the people on the street and get the actual products to people, which is, I applaud. I think it's a brave step to step outside of academia, where you've been for so long, and in the hallowed halls, of academia. But it really runs on the ground, actually helping people who need it now is so much more valuable use of your time, I think. So, well done for doing that. I think, and running a business is, I run several businesses. It's not a simple thing, it's a constant battle, right? And we're all learning and growing, hopefully, without trying to hit the wall. But, coming back to polysaccharides, So the next study that you looked at, you had one in multiple sclerosis. Do we want to go there? Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. Can I just give you a couple more anecdotes about our last
Yes,
paper
yes,
from
yes,
the
please do.
Alzheimer's studies? So as I mentioned, we published 4 papers so far from this study, and the second and third ones I don't think were quite as exciting. I mean, we published them, but they were looking at brain-derived neurotropic factor and its relationship to some of the cognitive functioning measures in one article, and then the immune and inflammatory markers in the other article. Unfortunately, it only showed about an 11% increase over the 12-month period, so I didn't find that as exciting. But
That's a
this fourth
lot, though.
paper,
BDNF
well,
is that's a lot. That's quite a
no, it
lot.
is. I mean, it's not. It was a nice finding. It just wasn't. It just didn't quite for me. It just didn't quite meet the excitement level that I was hoping for, or hoping that we would be able to document. But nonetheless, we got, as I said, 2 other papers out of it. But what really this fourth paper that we published at the end of 2023 was very exciting, and I'll tell you why. Because it was also groundbreaking in the sense of showing things in Alzheimer's that had never been published before. So I had an idea to look at the Th1 to Th2 ratios
Yeah.
in Alzheimer's disease. That had never been done before, Lisa.
No.
I
Yeah.
shocked when I went to PubMed and I tried to find any other data looking at the Th1 to Th2, and that's just generally speaking your pro-inflammatory to your anti-inflammatory components of your immune system. I couldn't find one other paper in people with Alzheimer's disease. So I thought, okay, well, this is cool. We're going to be the first people to publish this. Then we had another clinical trial of healthy people in a different dietary supplement study. We had the exact same cytokines and growth factors that we had collected in both studies. We used the exact same panel. So I was able to compare the people with Alzheimer's to the healthy people. So that was also a first. And the people with Alzheimer's, huge numbers. I mean, so Th1 dominant, it was just really
Wow.
remarkable. And then all the people who were healthy, their numbers were like around 1 or 2. I mean, it was just crazy, the differences, and they were all statistically significantly different. And then and there were 6 of these ratios. And then over the 12-month intervention, 5 of the 6 of them decreased. So they went toward unity, although they were not close to it, but at least they were going, I refer to it as rebalancing, at least in that direction. And then the clinical cherry on top of the cake is that as those Th1 to Th2 ratios were rebalancing, those numbers were correlated with improved cognitive functioning. So that was
Wow.
just a really, really cool finding. And
Yeah.
again, demonstrating the links between brain health and immune function, and how, those 2 major organ systems are so vital in talking to each other, and really continuing to demonstrate how the immune system is not just our first line of defense against infection or invasion, but it's actually it's our conductor of the symphony orchestra, in the sense that it's always talking to all of our other major organ systems. And then in our case with the brain, especially showing the importance of that relationship. So that fourth paper was just much like the first paper for me, just incredibly rewarding. And even though, again, as a businessman, scientific publication is probably not in my top 10 list of priorities at this point, but being a scientist first and a marketer second, I believe it's very important as my business career unfolds to continue having that scientific base or foundation,
Absolutely. Yeah.
much like Dr. Tan. And to your point about him, I mean, I'm now trying to follow the same path. Basically, I've long since given up asking people for money to do research. I just want to build my company to be successful enough to fund the research myself. So that is part of my mission and part of what I'm doing now. But
Amen. That's awesome. I love that. That is really powerful. And just to double down on that Th1, Th2, can you just go into a little bit of detail, because nobody has ever picked this up before, that Alzheimer's patients are Th1 dominant. And this is quite an amazing finding.
right.
I was unaware of this. Can you explain a little bit more in detail what the Th1 and the Th2, and we have
Sure.
Th17 and 23 and 33,
Right.
but what is Th1 and Th2 really for someone who has never heard that term before?
So this goes all the way back actually to a paper in 1986. A group of investigators were looking at, of course, HIV being what HIV was back in the 80s. And they were looking at a mouse model of trying to help understand, how the profound impact that HIV was having on the immune system. And so they were looking at some of the cytokines and growth factors of these two particular components. So, for example, TNF alpha, which is actually is a very interesting molecule, depending on the circumstances or the environment, if you will. TH1 or TNF alpha can actually be TH1 or TH2, meaning it can be pro-inflammatory or it can be anti-inflammatory. But
Right.
so generally speaking, again, you have TH1 is your like pro-inflammatory side. So for example, you get a bacterial or a viral infection, well, boom, you kick on your TH1 components. So you have all of these factors that go to wherever the infection is, or even trauma, actually. It doesn't just have to be infection, but all of those signals, all those cytokines, they go to that area, and then they help to pull in all these other healing factors or healing components that our immune system is in charge of to help repair that or help clear that infection. And then once that becomes stable, or as that is going to, hopefully healing, then you have the TH2. Now the TH2 kicks in, and that's the anti-inflammatory side. So that's actually turning those signals off. So one of the theories now behind Alzheimer's disease that I'm sure you're aware of is that people are saying that potentially one of the leading causes of dementia later in life is infection early in life. So
Yeah.
you get these viruses, you get bacteria, you get a fungus, whatever the agent is. And then if your body doesn't clear those infections over time, you deal with these infections early in life, and then you keep your immune system dysregulated. So you have too much pro-inflammation. It's always signaling, it's always going. And then that leads you down this path of neurodegeneration. How and why that does that is still kind of the cloudy mystery part of it. But what I wish we had collected in our study now is looking at like titers of things like, Epstein-Barr,
Yes.
cytomegalovirus, the different herpes, hepatitis. I don't think anybody had HIV in our study, but, all these different viruses that are fairly
Wow.
common.
Yeah,
Pretty much
that would have been
everybody
interesting.
has
Yeah.
cytomegalovirus. I mean, that's, you just can't live without having cytomegalovirus. Same thing with most people have some level of Epstein-Barr.
Yep.
Most people have some type of herpes. I mean, all
Herpes.
these
Yep.
viruses are just, they're common. They're just very common. You get exposed to them. But if your body's immune system is functioning properly, you can basically keep them in a latent state and they don't
Yep.
cause you any problems. But if your immune system is not surveillant, modulated, functioning properly, then these viruses activate and they start causing you problems. And so it really, like, I wish, I'm like, gosh,
Yeah.
I
Why
wish
didn't you
we
do the
had,
titers on
why
that?
didn't
That would
we
have
do,
been
yeah, exactly.
greatest.
Why didn't we test for infections? Like that would have been such amazing information if we had had that. So one of
Yeah.
our goals for, hopefully second study is that we will look at infections in people with Alzheimer's, because I believe if we had had the ability to test for infections in our sample, we would have shown that. Now we actually still have plasma. One thing I need to ask my lab partner about actually is we actually still have the plasma from our subjects from that study. I don't know if plasma can be tested for infections or for, titers of viruses, but
Could be
perhaps if
still
we could do
retrospective.
that, then that would be something that we could look at.
And
But yeah,
it's
this
not.
all
Yeah, I'm sorry. It's not only Alzheimer's that these viruses can cause, or perhaps cause, like cancer can be another thing that comes
right,
out when you like mum's cancer, for example, is an EBV, Epstein-Barr virus positive cancer, if you like. And
that's
so
right,
what we need to understand in this post-COVID world, or this current COVID world, what sort of impact is this nasty virus going to have on the long term? Because we are seeing long COVID, we are seeing, cognitive issues, brain fog, people complaining of fatigue, brain fog. What sort of, and whether that's from the actual spike protein itself from the COVID or the vaccines as well, I believe,
right.
is this ongoing the suppression of all of this, that the immune system's having to keep on top of all of this, that over time the immune system starts to, dysregulate, we lose our thymic function, and this is, when these viruses start to come out in us and start to get the upper hand. And is
That's
that
right.
then leading to, and we know it leads to cancer and other diseases.
Right.
It's not really well talked about that it could actually lead to Alzheimer's as well. And,
Exactly.
In the post-COVID world, are we going to see a much higher prevalence of some of these diseases happening, in future?
I
That's
believe
what,
we will.
me too.
I agree
It's
with you.
concerning.
But I
Yeah.
think, again, just to sum that up, it was just a really nice finding that we showed for the first time how Th1 dominant these people with Alzheimer's are. And if, again, if we had had the infection titer data, I bet you all the money that I have that we would have showed a relationship between that Th1 dominance and those folks having, strong titers of different viruses. I'm almost sure we would have shown that.
Yeah, yeah. All right, you back to the lab for you.
That's right. Back to the drawing board.
um, so now, sort of moving over into the multiple sclerosis study that you did as
Yes.
well. Tell us what were the outcomes of that, and what were you measuring there? What were you looking at?
Well, speaking of infections, so I don't know, I didn't know this at the time until, getting into running the study, but people with MS actually don't typically die of demyelination of the central nervous system. They actually die from infections.
Mm,
So speaking of infections, the polysaccharides, among all of their other amazing characteristics is they're very anti-infective. And so we had them on a 12-month intervention as well. And they showed, I think it was 7.9 on average infections at baseline, all the way down to 2.5 at 12 months. So that was a
wow.
very exciting finding for us. I mean, not only are you helping to save these people's lives, but you're also keeping them out of urgent care or the hospital where, they're dealing with all these different infections. It's very costly and it's very difficult to treat those things. But we had basically the same design. We looked at a lot of the same inflammatory and immune markers. Of course, the cognitive issue with MS is not as prevalent or not as challenging as it is with Alzheimer's. It's more of, as you know, physical
Yeah,
functioning. So we had a different set of assessments that we utilized with the FAMS, which is the gold standard for people with MS. It's called the Functional Assessment of Multiple Sclerosis. We showed, I think out of there are like 8 scales on that particular measure, like 6 of them were statistically significantly improved over the 12-month period. Just very, very strong, significant findings there. We showed with their quality of life measures, with our mood measure, all these different symptomatology measures, again, just wildly statistically significantly improved.
wow.
On the inflammatory immune side, we showed a very nice change in the immune system's functioning. We showed with EGF, epidermal growth factor, which is very important for remyelination. We showed a very nice increase in that protein. So that was a really significant finding. We showed with the FAST gene, a very significant improvement there. That's FAS.
Mm-hmm.
That's the CD34, CD95 cell,
Mm-hmm.
which is also kind of like the CD4 to CD8 ratio. It's a global marker of improved or immune function, excuse me.
Wow.
So again, a lot of really nice cellular and physiological support to demonstrate and to validate why we showed all of these other changes on the quality of life functioning side. So to me, like MS isn't thought of as the same level of debilitator or killer as dementia or Alzheimer's is. So you don't get quite the same level of excitement from the MS study as you do from the Alzheimer's study. But we published 2 papers from that study so far. We have a third paper. It's actually the Th1, Th2 sister paper from the Alzheimer's study. I ran the exact same analyses with our MS data. So that paper is currently under review. Hopefully that will be published in the next month or 2, and I'd be happy to come back on your show again
Yes,
if you like.
please.
We can talk about that new paper. But that'll be, Lisa, that will be our 7th paper that we've published from these 2
From
studies. And
2
so I would,
studies. Wow.
those 2 studies. So I would put our body of work up against just about anybody else, in this brain health arena, if you will. It's obviously a very large arena, a very large umbrella. But really from, cradle to grave, I mean, you've got obviously children with autism,
Yeah.
ADHD. We haven't studied any children. We're trying to do some work with kids if possible. Again, it's all about how much funding you have. And then of course, later in life, you have all this neurodegeneration.
Yeah.
And then all of us in between with, whether it's concussion syndrome or mood disorder, bipolarism, TBI, PTSD. I mean, there's just so many different things across the lifespan, as you know, that affect the brain's health. And so that's the reason why we went down this route as far as a business. I mean, we have all this data that we utilize for the claims on our labels and, to support that science, plus the fact that the conventional perspective to all these things is really very poor at best. And so that's the reason why we focused in the brain area, if you will. But quite
Mm.
frankly, as I mentioned earlier, these polysaccharides are used by every cell in the body. So
So it's going
the
to
body,
benefit everybody, really.
that's right,
Yes.
exactly. The body doesn't care what the name is on a label. It's
No.
what you have in the bottle that the body will actually interpret and utilize to either its advantage or disadvantage. But
Yeah.
we have some
Yeah.
other products that will be coming out in the future very soon that will be very complementary to daily brain care. But
Wow.
I'm very compelled and motivated to continue what I'm doing for the rest of my life, much like I'm sure many of your other guests that you've had on here in their same little niche. But I think for me, one of the most exciting things about what I do is just really based on our earlier part of our conversation, and that is educating people about the value of these polysaccharides and how most people have no clue about them,
No.
and the fact that it is something very different. And again, when you start unfolding or peeling back the layers of the onion and see how many different opportunities there are for supporting health and well-being, it's really just, I mean, to me, it's like basically nothing else. I mean, curcumin, of course, is an amazing nutrient that's been studied by literally thousands of people for millennia. But other than curcumin, I mean, again, I know I'm very biased. I mean, I'm sure CBD, they're phytocannabinoids,
Yeah,
different
there's
mushrooms.
for sure.
There
Like
are
your
other things out there
medicine,
that,
mushrooms actually are a polysaccharide, isn't it? Aren't they
that's right.
polysaccharides of
They
type? So yeah, so
absolutely,
medicinal
yes,
mushrooms can be really good. One other one that I absolutely love for brain as well, and for other basically for everyone, is plasmalogens. Have a look at the work of Dr.
yes,
Day and Goodnow. I love his work. Another passionate scientist who stepped outside of the ivory towers and actually trying to get this out to the people because realizing he's got to do it himself. So there's a common theme here.
that's right.
And all of these are very, very powerful, and I'm lucky enough to have your I don't know if people can see that. Oh, I've got my virtual
Beautiful.
thing on, so I can't. There it is. There it is.
There you go.
For those watching Daily Brain Care, and
Thank you.
I have that now in New Zealand. I've got it down, thanks to Dr. John, wholesaling that down here. So, and I've started mum on it yesterday. Literally yesterday, so it arrived. So it was good
Excellent.
timing, and I'm going to
Perfect.
I'll report back, how she does on it, and I'm going to take it myself as well, because God knows my brain could do with a bit of help keeping up with all these brilliant scientists like yourself. So I need to
Everybody
be
needs,
optimizing brain power is also
that's right.
the other side of it for people. Can we just talk a little bit about the aloe vera? Why aloe vera and why rice bran? So let's start off with aloe vera. We know aloe vera for putting on sunburns and topical applications, and some people have the drinks. But why can you not just go and get an aloe vera drink from the health food store and that will be the same thing? What's the difference?
Yes. Great question. So that's a perfect question. We didn't address this earlier, but the aloe vera inner leaf gel is the most special part of the plant. Obviously, you can't eat the outer layer. That's not digestible at all. And then there's a layer that's a yellowish layer that's just below the leaf. That's like a latex material. You don't want that either. So that gets taken away. But the gel is 99% water. So
Mm,
imagine in just a few whatever a liter of this gel, imagine how little polysaccharide content there is in that 1 liter of gel, because it again is 99% water. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with drinking an aloe vera juice drink or some
no,
of these other liquid products, but if you have some really serious health challenge, and it could be neurodegeneration, heart disease, cancer, diabetes, whatever, I don't care what your health challenge is, but you really have to get a concentrated amount of these polysaccharides. And there are other things in that gel too. It's not just the acetylated polymannans. There are fatty acids, amino acids, vitamins, minerals. I mean, there's lots of things. This isn't just one source, if you will, for these particular nutrients. But you really want to get all of that stripped out. And especially you want to get all of the water extracted out, and then concentrate the polysaccharides into a concentrated dose. And again, we're only talking a few hundred milligrams. I mean, we're not talking like, hundreds of grams or anything. We're literally talking about a few hundred milligrams per dose or per serving that can actually have a very therapeutic benefit. But you'd never get that by just drinking that gel. So I'm
No.
glad you asked me that, because a lot of times people, as soon as
Yeah.
I start talking about aloe vera, that's one of the, all I have to do is just start drinking some juice and I'll get the same benefit. No,
No.
probably not, because
Mm.
you just will not get enough of the polysaccharide in a concentrated amount to actually have any therapeutic value or benefit.
Yeah, it could have, be helpful for your gut health or something else
Right.
rather, but it's not the concentrated extract form. And the same with the rice bran, you could have brown rice for lunch, but
Right.
it's not going to cut the mustard, is it, so to speak?
No. No, it won't. And we didn't even really talk too much about rice bran today. Maybe we could do that on another show. But 70 to 80% of the rice sold in the world is white rice. That's just the white endosperm that's basically like digestible carbohydrate. The rice bran is the layer in between the hull or the husk, which again, we cannot eat. It's indigestible. And then that next layer is the bran. Well, again, most of that bran is getting stripped off and either thrown away or fed to livestock. But that's where all of the benefit of this amazing plant comes from. You're not getting it if you're just eating white rice. And to your point, I mean, I eat brown rice most days of the week. I'm a big fan of brown rice, but even still, you'd have to eat probably, I don't know, several cups. I mean, it would take a really big amount
Which would be too
of
much
eating
carbs
brown
and
rice every day.
lectins. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. You're
Other
eating all that
things.
other stuff anyway. So you probably would not get enough rice bran just eating brown rice every day. You really have to have it concentrated in a powder to again get the therapeutic benefit or value that would be, very health promoting.
And then some other elements that you've got in there. You've got N-acetylcysteine. You've got that yam root powder. What was the name
Yes,
of that?
the diascoria.
Diascoria.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah, tell us a little bit about why some of these other elements that you put in there.
Well, because, again, going back to one of my earlier comments about the difference between the nutritional and the pharmacological models, are that with nutrition, we know that through the study of physiology and cellular physiology, especially, every cell needs different nutrients, vitamins, minerals, all at the same time, right? I mean, again, oxygen is our first nutrient, but then after that, we need all these other things for every organelle in our cell to function properly. Excuse me. So the idea with creating this formulation was to try to help people get back to homeostasis or get back to some level of functioning. And so we wanted to supply different nutrients from different sources that we knew that certain things that provide, diascoria, for example, has these different saponins in them that actually improve metabolic health. So they're very good for that side of the thing. N-acetylcysteine is a precursor to glutathione, our master antioxidant. So, that's something else that people are very deficient in, especially very older sick people. So
Yep.
there were just ways of looking at this that were not, it was like going against the magic bullet or the
Yeah.
one thing
So one
solution.
pharmacological model, where
That's
they're
right.
just hammering one pathway or one thing. Yeah.
That's right. It was giving all these different nutrients so that the cells could function properly, so that you could actually demonstrate the opportunity for healing and recovery, as opposed to just saying, well, let me only just look at this one thing, and then we're going to pin all of our hopes on just this one nutrient or this one phytonutrient or this one vitamin or mineral. And then if it doesn't work, it failed. And, then you're back to the drawing board. But this is comprehensive nutrition as opposed to the pharmacological sniper model of, again, just looking at one chemical and trying to manipulate one mechanism of action or one metabolic pathway to deal with the symptom of a disease.
Yeah, I love that. And this is harder to study, right? Like this is why
Yes.
it's so important that you've actually had this formula in the clinical trials that you've done.
That's right.
And it's one of the reasons that, with the pharmacological model that they were always doing, placebo-controlled, double-blinded, randomized controlled trials, whatever you call them.
That's
which,
right.
but that doesn't really work for the nutrition model, does it? It's fine
No.
for the pharmacological model, but we need variables. And there's a analogy that I heard, which was a beautiful analogy. If you've got a plant that's it's dying, it's got toxic soil, it doesn't have any water, and it's not getting any sunshine. And then you do one thing at a time in a randomized controlled trial, right? You change the soil, but you don't put water, and you don't, and then you go, okay, well, soil doesn't matter to the plant, and
Right.
and then do it with
great
water.
analogy.
Yeah, and then you do it with water, but you stick it in a cupboard, and it's still got no sunshine, and it's still got the point. And that's exactly what the pharmacological model does, right? It does not look at the synergy, because it's more complicated. Everything in functional health and functional medicine is more complicated than here's a prescription, and here's a protocol, and here's a 1+2 magic bullet approach. And we all want that, but that's not life. That's not how biology works. And so, this is a really close. Yeah, and it's great that you've actually had this formula in the clinical trials. And so I've got daily brain care. So if you can go to Dr. Lewis's website to look up all the science, all the information, and everything. So Dr. John, where is the website? Give us your website address, and I'll put it in the show notes as well. But we also have it now down in my shop in New Zealand. So for New Zealand Australians that are wanting to source it, go and check out my curated range of longevity and anti-aging supplements over at lisatamati.com, and you'll find Dr. Lewis's stuff there. Because, once again, I've gone out into the world for the last 8-9 years, got the best stuff for my mum, and then going, why the hell am I not sharing this with the rest of the world, right?
That's right.
And so, and she's a walking miracle. So, and we've added this in now, and I'm excited to see what this does, Like, can we get her back to the next level and the next level? And anybody who says to me, like, oh, once you've got an Alzheimer's diagnosis, and I hear this over and over again, there's nothing you can do. And there is nothing further from the truth. I've proven it over and over. I know it's only an N of 1 in her case, but I've also, I have a hyperbaric oxygen clinic. I see the results of that, and I work with people one-on-one, and I see their results. Like, you can recover your brain. And you can, even when it's quite advanced. And my mum was like, not much over a vegetative state, came back, and over again, as she's had different infections and operations and cancers, we've lost her so many times, where she's been to the point where she doesn't know my name, she doesn't know who she is or what she is. And then I've got her back again. And if, if she's sitting over there, I'd let her come to Word, but I have to go and haul her out of her book that she's reading. But she, like, you wouldn't know just sitting, having a coffee with her, that she's got any mental impairment. She can't walk 100% yet because she broke a hip, and she's got balance issues, and she's got normotensive hydrocephalus. But, like, for where we've come through and what we've been through, I've proven over and over again that the brain can heal itself. You give it the right nutrients, you give it the right things, and it can. Right. And I think daily brain care is something that people should have on their radar. And, it's not even like, this isn't even that expensive. Like, if you look at putting your loved one into Alzheimer's or dementia unit, where it costs down here around $8,000 a month, and then people go to me, I can't afford the $100 or whatever a month, for the supplements, or the couple of hundred, or the 300, or whatever it is. It's a hell of a lot less than putting your loved one in a dementia unit, not to mention the pain and the suffering and the horror. And this is what motivates me, because I live it every day. My life is impaired as much as a caregiver. My businesses are impacted. Everything's impacted because I don't have the freedom to travel. I don't have all of those things, because my mum does need me every day, all day. And so my business ability to have as big an impact in the world as I'd like is limited. But that's the sacrifice that I've, decided to make. And that's, I do that gladly and willingly. But this is happening over millions and millions of times. People are like me in the same situation, who are dealing with their loved ones, or they've been put into institutions, and they're not nice places. We've got to
That's right.
do things for this. So thank you, Dr. John, for all the hard work. And yeah, I know that it's been a rough road for you, stepping out of academia and leaving that and going into the business world and having to learn all that. And I know that isn't easy. But
Yes, definitely.
it's absolutely amazing that you've done it and you're helping people all around the world. And my mum will be the next one that you're helping. So thank you.
Beautiful. Well, thank you for having me. And any of your listeners can go to drlewisnutrition.com. We have so much really nice information there. People can contact me if they want to hear, if they have questions or they want to hear something straight from me in terms of anything else that they didn't feel like was answered on our website. I can share the articles we published. I mean, there's all kinds of testimonials, product reviews, and all of those are completely legitimate. Nobody's been paid to say or do anything on behalf of our company or our products. That's all legitimate. But I'm happy to help anybody. I feel like it's a big calling, to help people like you do. I mean, we're obviously kindred spirits on this level. And so it's important for me to answer anybody's call. I want to be available to people as much as I can to help them with their own health or some family member or someone that they know. And so this is what
Amazing.
motivates me today. And I will continue doing this till my last breath. But thank you again
Wow.
for having me on your show.
You're a wonderful human being, Dr. John. Thank you so much. And I've
Thank
got to
you.
have you back on when you get your other study up, and
Definitely.
we'll dig deeper, and I'll tell you how we're going
Please.
down this step.
Absolutely.
Thank you so
Fantastic.
much, Dr. John.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.